Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I am Nan Aron, President of Alliance for Justice, and thank you so much, all of you, for joining us in our latest virtual Holding Court series, featuring leading advocates, attorneys, elected officials, to discuss issues related to our judiciary, our rights, and our justice system. No doubt, this event occurs in difficult and challenging times. Our nation faces a health and economic crisis, and this week we are once again reminded by the tragic murder of George Floyd and the scores of Americans across the country marching in the streets of the continual fight for racial justice. So I want to begin by thanking all of you joining this call from across the country. The work of each of you fighting for justice every day in your professional work, your volunteering, and your activism is so critical and essential. Thank you so much. I am honored that in this event, we are partnering with my wonderful friend, Linda Lipsen, and the American Association for Justice, an organization that's been on the front lines for decades in the fight for access to justice, so that the courthouse doors remain open and our rights and critical protections can be given full effect. Linda and I have been in many fights together, and I'm thrilled to be sharing the stage with her this evening. And oh my, are we honored to be joined by Senator Mazie Hirono, one of the great champions in the Senate for fair courts and judges, and ensuring that all of our laws protect all persons, not just the wealthy and powerful. I remember when I first met Mazie Hirono, she told me about her years as a legal services lawyer. And I thought, how wonderful, a legal services lawyer, becoming a senator and bringing that amazing experience to bear on the important legal issues of the day. We are also so pleased to be joined by Rebecca Dixon, Executive Director of the National Employment Law Project, and Professor Myriam Gilles of Cardozo School of Law. We are in for a treat. We will have a conversation for about 45 minutes and then open it up for questions for the audience. If you have a question, please email rachel@afj.org. So I'm going to first turn my questions to Senator Hirono, who will be joined by Linda Lipsen. And I think I would start the question by saying the wealthy and powerful long have fought to eliminate the ability of individuals to hold bad actors accountable for corporate wrongdoing. Medical malpractice, unsafe products, illegal working conditions, civil rights violations, and environmental pollution. However, I never thought we would need to fight in the middle of a pandemic that has taken over 100,000 American lives and led to an economic and health crisis for the right of workers to go to work in safe and healthy workplaces, and for consumers to be able to shop and buy products without endangering their health. So Senator Hirono and Linda, can you describe the efforts by Senate Republicans and the Chamber of Commerce to give the business community, regardless how closely they follow safety standards for their workplaces and businesses, describe what they're doing and describe the legislation they are trying to enact in Congress?
Aloha, Nan. Can I go first?
You sure can.
Hi, Linda.
Hey,
My friend Linda, who I've known since she was a mere child. I was not a mere child, but she was. Anyway, if your priority is not to protect workers or to protect consumers, and your priority is to protect businesses, then you will use every opportunity, such as the midst of a pandemic where we've already lost over 100,000 lives, you will use every opportunity to try to push what I call tort deform. And I used to be a plaintiff's lawyer, so I know something about personal injury cases. When I was in the state house, in the state legislature, I chaired the committee that dealt with all insurance issues. And so, yes, there would be this whole wave of what I would call tort limiting ideas every single year. And so once again, we are confronted in the middle of a pandemic with Mitch McConnell saying it is a red line for him that unless we protect the businesses from liability, that he doesn't want to move forward with another COVID bill, which is sorely needed to protect workers and small businesses in our communities. So coming from Mitch McConnell, this is sadly his priority.
Absolutely. I mean, for 34 years, McConnell has been in Congress, and every single time there's a crisis, whether it's 9/11, swine flu, even the non-crisis that was Y2K, the first thing he does is say, what we really need is tort deform.
Yes.
He is obsessed with this subject. And he, funny thing happened on the way to a hearing. The Judiciary Committee held a hearing, and all of the business witnesses admitted, there was actually a consensus that bloomed out of that hearing, and they admitted that what they really needed was not immunity, but what they needed was enforceable standards coming from the federal government. We have certainly the biggest health crisis facing the nation in my lifetime. And the answer can't be that what we need to do is encourage businesses that act unreasonably to continue to act unreasonably. We need to protect workers. We need to protect consumers. And these types of measures that will make it impossible for individuals to go to court will only leave us less safe and the pandemic raging on around us. So bad idea. It keeps coming up. I wish we could kill it for once and for all, but I guess we can't. I guess
we know it's going to keep on coming up because anytime there's an opportunity. I did get a kick out of the outcome of that hearing, which I know that Lindsey Graham thought was going to result in some other kind of suggestion, which was to limit corporate liability. But as Linda mentioned, what came out of it was from both the Republican witnesses as well as the Democratic witnesses, that unanimously they said, no, what we need are enforceable science-based standards that will protect workers and consumers.
So follow-up question one, are there any Republicans who are willing to vote against this idea? And I guess more importantly, if this is passed, what impact would corporate immunity have, Senator Hirono, on your constituents?
First of all, before they even come up with, they have to come up with more than just talking about it, because liability law is based on state law, and for the federal government to swoop in and preempt state law, state negligence laws, there are all kinds of issues that come up, and frankly, we don't even have a bill. He's just talking about it. And so what's going to happen is if you protect corporations from their negligence, then they're going to be negligent. One hopes that most of them would not do that they would provide protections for their workers and their consumers, but there are always bad actors. And so you're going to protect all these bad actors who will not follow safe conditions, and people will start getting sick. That will be the outcome. And you know, we have not bent the curve on this pandemic. We don't have nationwide testing. We don't have a lot of the things that a vaccine. We don't have the assurances that we need to feel safe in our workplaces and going into establishments. So that's what they want to foreclose, any kind of a real effort to get a handle on this pandemic. And at the same time, as always with any kind of a push for tort limitations, there's never much evidence that we're seeing a flurry of tort, negligence lawsuits or medical malpractice cases. of that. No, they never rely on that kind of evidence. They just like to say, well, we're going to protect the businesses, and that's their orientation.
But the businesses can still sue their insurance companies. So if there's any kind of uptick in litigation, it's businesses asking their insurance companies to pay them back for business interruption claims. And so what's really fascinating, and I'm always amazed by this, is that the statistics that are used by Senators McConnell and Cornyn are that we looked at them all, and they're out of 105,000 deaths, there are only 40 personal injury cases out of all of that. So basically, this whole concept of a lawsuit pandemic is just another fib in the arsenal of fibs around this subject. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Senator Hirono, how do you think this issue is impacting the ability of the Senate to address our current health and economic crisis facing the country?
Obviously, Mitch McConnell doesn't feel any sense of urgency that we need to do more, because if his red line is that we have to have this kind of a tort deform bill before he addresses the fact that there are 40 million people out of work, small businesses are going under, and there's an economic crisis, he does not feel a sense of urgency, and apparently neither does the president. And so the rest of us have to continue to push for the fact that states need help. Republican governors as well as Democratic governors, I know, have contacted the White House. They've talked to the president asking for billions in federal assistance to meet their budget shortfalls because of the pandemic. And the state of Hawaii is probably facing about a $1 billion shortfall, and nationwide, the governors have asked for $500 billion to help their states. Now that is a bipartisan request, but do you think Mitch McConnell is addressing that? No, his first instinct was to say the states and counties can declare bankruptcy. And that is one of the most asinine kind of suggestions and irresponsible suggestions I've heard from Mitch McConnell, but sadly that's also not particularly unusual for Mitch to take that kind of uncaring, callous position.
I know, Senator Hirono, due to the press of business, your time is very limited. Do you have time for one more quick question?
Of course.
Wonderful. And Linda, I'd love you to chime in as well. And that is, what can all of us who are listening do about this? Are there some actions that we can take to address this Republican move?
I know that the majority of the American people, when asked in a poll, do you think that businesses should be able to create a business environment where you can go in and catch this virus? Do you think that they should be excused from liability for that? And most Americans will say, no, they don't want that. So, I think it's how we frame it. If we say that the Republicans are trying to create an environment where the businesses don't have to protect their workers or you, the consumer, I think they will say that's not what we want. So I think we need to continue to focus on their priorities or their lack thereof, and we will continue to focus on the need to support small businesses, workers, and our communities. So whatever, all the people who are on this call, please to explain that really plainly. Do you want to go into an establishment where the owner doesn't have to care about whether or not it's safe for you to go there? Is that the kind of establishment you would want to go to? The answer would be no.
Well, it's penny wise and pound foolish, because employees want to know that their employer is trying to make it safe, that they are doing everything they can to make it safe. And we know this, if no one is accountable, no one is safe. So, I always say make some noise, particularly if anybody on this Zoom call lives in a Republican state or has a Republican member that represents them in Congress. Tell them that this is exactly the wrong thing to do. Remember, we're all in this together. We're trying to stop the spread of this disease. If Joe is sitting too close to John in a cubby, and John is sneezing on Joe, and then Joe goes home and gives it to grandma, and grandma walks down the street and gives it to, I mean, we have to stop the spread. And the wrong thing to do is to say that, oh, don't worry, companies, you're immune. We know that in meatpacking plants and prisons, nursing homes have a specific problem. And if you were to just say, okay, we don't care, Congress has decided we don't care, and you're all immunized willy-nilly, everyone's going to suffer. Everyone's going to suffer, and we're not going to be able to stop the spread of this horrible disease.
And that's why what we should be calling for, and I agree with you completely, is for OSHA to establish national standards that will protect workers and consumers. That's what we should be calling for, not immunizing everybody for whatever non-actions they take to keep workers and consumers safe. So Mitch's idea is entirely the wrong idea, but this is, you know, these kinds of tort reforms have been going on for decades, and we just have to keep fighting back every time. And I want to thank Linda and your group, because I'm well aware of what you guys do. And as a former plaintiff's lawyer, believe me, when lawsuits are filed, it's not as though the insurance companies that are insuring all these businesses against liability, they're not standing there handing out the money to the plaintiffs. By the way, you have to prove negligence. That is not the easiest thing to do, believe you me. So we should not be heading people off at the courthouse for redress for injuries that occur to them through no fault of their own.
Well, Senator Hirono, thank you so much.
Thank you
for standing up and fighting for us, and know that we are all behind you, lifting up what you're doing. So thanks so much. And I also want to thank you for fighting the good fight against most of Trump's judicial nominees.
Oh, please, the court backing, that's a whole another Zoom event. I can go on for.
You've been a hero on that to us, so thank you.
And aloha to everyone. And as I say, stay safe, be kind, and aloha to your Mazie, Nan.
She sends her love to you. She was very upset. She couldn't see you in person.
Tell her I said hi.
I will.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Mazie.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Linda.
So I'm delighted to be bringing in Rebecca and Myriam to this conversation. Linda will stay with us, I hope, and chime in. But hello, Rebecca, and hello, Myriam.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us today.
Hi.
And thank
Happy
you
to
for
be
your
here.
wonderful work on this issue. So, question for Rebecca. You heard Senator Hirono discuss the impact corporate immunity would have on workers. And oh my God, does NELP do what needs to be done on behalf of workers? No worker should have to choose between providing for their family and fearing for their health and possibly their lives. Yet the reality is we've seen scores of examples of unsafe and unhealthy workplaces. Can you describe some of the unsafe working conditions that you've witnessed during the pandemic, and how giving business immunity would only exacerbate the problem that so many workers face?
Sure. So we know that far too many employers were slow to implement even the most basic CDC guidelines and recommendations around protective equipment, hand washing, and spacing at least 6 feet apart. And it's not just the healthcare and nursing home examples that we're very familiar with, but also, you know, as varied as sanitation workers and, of course, workers who are processing meat in processing plants. And we've seen, you know, at Walmart store in Massachusetts where, you know, more than 20% of the workers got infected and several of them actually died. We've seen in meatpacking, at least 35 workers have died. And the really sad and tragic part about this is that these are all preventable, and that we could actually be taking measures to prevent folks from getting sick and dying. We know that worker health is public health. And so not only is it a danger to those workers and their families, but also the communities that they are going into. We know that if we give employers immunity with there being actors, bad actors who are currently not in really taking care of workers or enforcing any kind of standards, then we kind of set up a race to the bottom where the good employers who are trying to protect their workers kind of don't have any incentive to continue to do that if there's immunity.
And Professor Gilles, you've written extensively on the efforts by companies, corporations to close the courthouse door, whether through forced arbitration or eliminating class actions. 5 years ago, you were quoted in the New York Times that we are seeing, quote, a whole-scale privatization of the justice system, and that, quote, Americans are actively being deprived of their rights, close quote. If corporations were given corporate immunity, would a sick worker or a consumer have any remedy? And two, what would the real world impact be of closing the courthouse doors?
Well, my sense is that we've already given businesses so many immunities. I mean, they're functionally immune because, of course, class action bans and forced arbitration clauses protect businesses from all sorts of liability and keep us from being able to vindicate our rights under federal and state law. I think that when the impact of tort reform, from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s in the states has made it much harder for litigants to prove negligence. The senator mentioned it right before she got off the call, but it's really difficult to prove negligence. And in many jurisdictions, for example, joint and several liability, the collateral source rule, some of these important pro-plaintiff doctrines have been done away with, have been eliminated, which only makes it harder and makes it harder to find a lawyer who's willing to take these claims in the first place. And finally, on the worker side, I think, Rebecca's the expert and she did an amazing job testifying at that hearing, which was very focused on workers. But I think that, the big point there is that workers' compensation provides the exclusive remedy in 49 states. And so workers are really, their claims are probably limited either by workers' comp or by forced arbitration. So they really have nowhere to go with many of these claims. So I think that to answer your second question, though, I think it's pretty clear what I think here. We have already in this country witnessed such a huge backlash against plaintiffs, whether they be workers, consumers, small business owners, civil rights plaintiffs. Business today has more power than it's ever had. And so this bill strikes me as unnecessary, a breach of federalism principles that Republicans supposedly like, at least, when it's convenient, and really harmful to, especially to people of color, workers of color, consumers who shop at stores that are perhaps not the fanciest stores in the country. This is gonna have the same inequitable impact that we've seen with so many issues that we're addressing today, including policing and the coronavirus in general.
Tell us a little bit about that hearing, Rebecca, that you testified at. Who were the other witnesses? Whose committee?
Sure. So this was in Senate Judiciary, and the other witnesses, so the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union was there. He talked a lot about his members and the actual impact on those members. So those members are not just in the meatpacking plants, but they're also workers who work in grocery stores, who are in healthcare as well. And then there was a gentleman who was representing colleges and universities who really talked about how they would love some guidance on exactly how to protect students and to protect their employees. And the fact that right now there is no mandatory enforceable guidance from the occupational safety and health is a problem for him in terms of trying to figure out exactly how to reopen safely. There was also a gentleman who represented convenience store trade association, and he talked about the different locations that he has and the ways that he's trying to protect his workers, but that he doesn't really have any guidelines to rely on in terms of whether he's actually doing the best possible job at that. And then another witness was from the tourism industry and really talked about, I guess, the concerns around tourism and wanting immunity for that. But as the senator said, why would a customer or a consumer want to go somewhere where no one cares whether they get sick?
Yeah.
You know, Linda, AAJ has been on the forefront of the fight against forced arbitration, and progress is being made. How do these two issues intersect? Forced arbitration and corporate immunity that we're talking about today.
Well, it's forced arbitration is just another barrier to individuals to get into court. Forced arbitration is completely rigged, and most consumers are affected by it, and they don't even know it because it's always in the fine print. They only know it when something horrible happens to themselves or their families. But in addition to forced arbitration, you know, Myriam's right. I mean, what Mitch McConnell is trying to do is he's not trying to protect companies that act reasonably because they're already protected. He's trying to protect companies that act unreasonably. And so, you know, a barrier in addition to forced arbitration is having to prove negligence, but an even bigger barrier is having to prove causation. I mean, you're going to have to prove this virus is everywhere. And if you're not in one of the hot spots that we talked about, a cruise vessel, a meat packing plant, a nursing home, a prison, if you're not in one of those, how are you going to prove that you got it from your work, or you got it from the grocery store, or you got it? I mean, that's why, you know, when Mitch McConnell, I mean, it's almost laughable when he talks about this, you know, this Pandora's box of lawsuits. It's just a big fib, and you just listen to it, and you just want to get in his face and just say, stop saying that. It's just not true. And if there's any uptick at all, it's businesses trying to negotiate with their insurance companies, businesses against businesses, not your grandmother suing a business or your neighbor or your family member. So this is a maddening topic, as you can see from my reaction.
Can I just add
Sure.
one thing to that? I agree with everything Linda said, but I'd also say, not only, you know, is he trying to protect the worst people, but the forced arb problem is, this is a public health crisis. And we should know what these companies, what these businesses, what these employers are doing. This stuff, should it ever actually go into arbitration, and I agree with Linda, most things will never see the light, will never go into arbitration. But we shouldn't even be talking about arbitration for these matters, because this is the stuff we should all know. It affects us all. So if Walmart is not giving its employees face masks or hand sanitizer, or keeping them 6 feet apart, or they're letting people come into work, and I don't mean to just pick on Walmart, but I've been reading a lot about Walmart, or they're letting people come to work who aren't feeling well, that's something everybody should know, right? So, and that's the purpose of having public courts. So I think the issue of forced arbitration clashing with this bill is really significant.
A few more questions and then we'll open it up to all of you. And one is, we know that this pandemic has exacerbated long-standing inequities in employment, as well as law enforcement, criminal justice, and numerous systems across our society. Can you speak to the real-world impacts, including racial and economic justice implications, of restricting workers' and consumers' rights to seek a remedy? Who wants to take that one on?
I'll start.
Go for it.
So, as you said, in America, opportunity and risk have always been segregated and stratified by race and gender. And that's true in this pandemic, where we see who the workers are who are considered essential, who have to work and show up and risk their lives. And a very small number of Latinx and African American workers actually have the capacity to work from home and continue to keep their jobs. And so we are seeing these folks being especially impacted, right? So we haven't, as a country, we don't have a track record of doing a very good job of protecting Black and brown workers or immigrant workers, even if we go back as far as the New Deal. And when we look at the sort of unwillingness of OSHA to actually put any kind of enforceable standard in place, and Congress to not force them to do so, we can argue about what the actual intent of that is, but the impact is that workers of color and folks in their communities are getting sick and dying in a disproportionate way because we are ignoring the issue and not looking out for workers.
Well, and what's really happening is that the business community has come to Congress to say, we want blanket immunity is what we want. We deserve blanket immunity. And at the same time, they don't want to be regulated by OSHA. And they don't want to be regulated by state law. So they don't want tort law, and they don't want a strong regulatory function. So, where are consumers in all of this? Where are workers in all of this? So, this is just backwards for what we need. And the most, the thing that's just crazy making is that it's going to cause more disease. This attitude is going to actually cause more disease, which we should expect our lawmakers to want to protect us against. So, we have a long road ahead of us. And I also want to mention that there's still, after, Mitch McConnell huffed and puffed and said, I've got a red line and I'm not gonna pass a bill to fund municipalities and states unless you pass massive tort reform. I'm not gonna do that. Well, he huffed and puffed, but there's still no bill. So we keep waiting, like, when are we gonna see a bill? Because, it's hard to react to just, some language that he uses based on a bunch of fibs. So we're waiting with bated breath. We were supposed to get it 2 weeks ago. And I'm told that they're still working on it because they're having trouble trying to figure out, how to make it constitutional. So we'll see.
I think they're also having trouble, and this came up at the hearing that Rebecca testified at. They're having trouble just figuring out the scope of the bill, right? What's the line between ordinary negligence and gross negligence? When do we know that? Generally it takes us a bit of litigation adjudication to figure that stuff out. And I think they're not really sure how they're going to, what it is they're trying to protect businesses against, because business might have come to Congress looking for blanket immunity. But there's no way we can immunize them against everything. There's no way that this bill could say everything is now okay. So there's going to be some line drawing that I think is going to make this really, really difficult and might raise some constitutional issues as well.
And to add on to that, we know that employers have long sought other kinds of immunity, and it's really a slippery slope. If they get immunity here, they're going to want immunity from overtime, having to pay overtime, from having to comply with paid sick leave, from having to pay minimum wage. So it's really is just them using this crisis as an opportunity to push for things that they've been pushing for a really long time.
My final question before we open it up, and I see we've got some questions, but mine is, all right, we've got 40 million Americans out of work. Most businesses are completely shut down. we all agree that our leaders need to address this health and economic crisis, but businesses say that that can't happen. That can't happen. They can't reopen if they fear a lawsuit every time one of their workers or customers gets sick, whether they're at fault or not. How do you respond to that concern expressed by businesses?
I mean, we're all afraid, aren't we? I mean, I'm afraid to walk down the street, but I don't go to Congress and say, please protect me because I'm afraid to walk down the street. I mean, you know, if a consumer organization came to Congress with such little data to ask for a huge policy change like this, they would be laughed out of the office. I mean, this is the most flimsy advocacy by businesses. The folks that are bringing lawsuits, and we found 40 of them, are not even asking for money. They're asking just to fix it, make it safe, make it so that I can go into my workplace and I'm not afraid for my life. So this is just, you know, it's just backwards, and we just gotta fight it. We can't let them do it.
From the worker perspective, workers already don't have a right to sue. Their exclusive remedy is workers' compensation. And it's a no-fault system. You basically give up your right to sue in exchange. Your medical bills are supposed to be covered. We know that those systems need to be overhauled. In some states, they don't provide protection to the extent that, like, those states have decided that the protection is so small, it's not constitutional. So it's a lot of smoke when we say that workers are going to sue their employers. They can't. They don't have a right to sue their employers.
I just think all this stuff is so overblown. You know, this is a new reality we're all living in, and I think employers and businesses are living through the same new reality, and we're all trying to figure out how to act reasonably under these circumstances, right? Tort law asks whether you acted reasonably under this circumstance, a fact-based analysis. The circumstances have changed, and so you do have to act a little differently. You do have to get face masks and gloves and make sure there's some social distancing and ask people if they're feeling well enough to come into work. And you do have to do things differently, but none of this strikes me as a massive enough change to require immunity, but also it's not you know, these people are human beings. You know, these employers, these business owners, they can go to work and still be human beings and ask the same questions of their employees and their consumers that they would ask of their family members, right? This strikes me as completely overblown. I guess I agree with what everybody else on the panel has said so far. It's just an overreach that's either born of fear or just, you know, this is the best opportunity. Let's strike while the iron's hot and get all the goodies we've been trying to get for years and years under the cover of crisis, which is sad.
Well, Myriam, do you think there'll be a tsunami of litigation all over the country?
No, I don't, because first of all, no lawyer takes a case with an arbitration clause, so that's 2/3 of your cases. I think that, as Rebecca noted, workers are, you know, that's a workers' comp situation. We're not going to really see lawsuits there. And I think the lawsuits that get brought should be brought, frankly. Those are serious claims. I think we ought to see claims about nursing homes that were completely inadequate to the task. You know, workplaces where people are simply not given any protective gear. I think those cases should be brought to light, and I think they should be brought to light, right, in public courts where possible. But there's not going to be a tsunami. There's going to be a trickle. And I think, I guess, even if there's more than we can, from sitting here, even if there are more cases than we can even imagine, I think that there will be nothing compared to sort of the extent of the harm that's been done to so many workers and consumers around the country as a result of this pandemic. So, I mean, it depends on how you look at it, but no, I don't think so.
Audience question. Number one, how can we highlight the benefits of ensuring we can hold corporations accountable for keeping us safe?
I'll start. I would just go back to worker health is public health. We're talking about workers and consumers. Consumers are interacting with workers. Workers are putting their lives on the line because they are essential, even in cases where they're receiving very low pay. And if those workers get sick, consumers could get sick, but also the families and communities that all of these people touch. Like, we're all interconnected. And so if we don't see that in this moment, I don't know when we would see it as a country.
40% of all the deaths are in nursing homes. This is a national disgrace. This is what we're learning. We're going to learn more because of the lawsuits. We're going to learn how nursing homes handle disease vectors rampant in their operations. We're going to learn that. I'm optimistic. We're going to find out what the problem is. And I guarantee you, in the next Congress, there will be legislation to help deal with that. There will be regulations to help deal with that. And that's what that also, you know, you can show the benefit of legislation. Just look at a car. You know, you have seat belts and windows that don't decapitate folks that are in it, and roofs that don't crush upon impact. All of those features are because of litigation. You could go on and on and on with that. So, and the same is going to be true for this as well.
Nursing homes, by the way, have, I think, been one of the great beneficiaries of forced arbitration clauses, because, you know, they've been using them, you know, for at least a dozen years. And so much of what's going on today is really just the culmination of the fact that they are unregulated at least by the private enforcers. I guess I would just add that, you know, one of the other things that was sort of interesting about the hearing was I'm going to forget his name, Rebecca, you can remind me, but his last name was Smalls, and he was the guy who owned all those convenience stores, and he described all the things that he had done right. And he got tons of credit from all the senators for having done all these things right. You know, I guess it's been such bad news all the time. It's good to see somebody doing the things that all seemed reasonable and not crazily over the top, normal, reasonable stuff he did. It strikes me that people like him should actually not want immunity, because they're doing fine. They're doing all the stuff that's reasonable. And he should be worried about businesses that aren't doing those things getting a market advantage by cutting corners. And so I think, just to answer the question, if we could find a way to speak to businesses that are not in the pocket of the chamber, that don't believe all the crap the chamber espouses, and try to get them to understand that this is actually bad for good businesses. This is bad for good employers. This does not help. Immunity only protects those who are acting badly, right? Because if you're doing all the right stuff, first of all, you'll get all the credit like Smalls did during the hearing, and second, and you should want your consumers and employees to know that, right? It should be out there that you're doing all the right stuff. But the businesses, the shady businesses, or the companies that just don't care, well, that should also be out there, and consumers can vote with their feet, right? They cannot go to those places, and employees, if they have the opportunity, if they have the ability, can try to find other work. So I think there's a business angle here that we should try to use whenever we can, because this affects good businesses.
Good point.
I can see from all your names that you all are from all different parts of the country, and I'm interested in knowing what's happened in the states. Are there any movements in the states to advance legislation that would ensure corporate immunity at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, about 28 states.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a lot. Next question. How are the standards we can hold corporations accountable to affected by the patchwork of reopening phases and guidelines across the states?
I think this is a question that came up at the hearing as well, right? You know, there's all the witnesses talked about how they were just getting mixed messages from their localities versus their states versus the federal government. They weren't really sure what the right standards were. So to the extent that question is just about a mismatch or mixed messages coming from different levels of government or different agencies. I think that's something that that is what really came out of that hearing. We need to speak with one voice. It needs to be an expert voice that comes from a place of science, not politics, and that is willing to sort of say, this is what you need to do. This is the bare minimum. Here's other stuff you could do. If you do this stuff, you have a defense against any possible claim of negligence. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that occurs to me that we're talking about creating uniformity here.
I think some states just don't care,
Mm-hmm.
and they're in a mode where they are putting profits over people, and they don't care whether there's enforceable standards for employers to follow to keep workers safe.
So someone raises a question: what can I do if I or one of my family members gets sick because a business failed to put adequate safety measures in place?
If you can prove it, you can file a lawsuit. I mean, right now you can.
Anyone else? I'm interested in knowing, in addition to the Chamber of Commerce, who is pushing this idea of corporate immunity? I know some businesses are, certainly Mitch McConnell and his funders, but say a little bit about ALEC.
Say a little bit about who?
ALEC.
Well, it's actually, the cleaning supply people are very active in this space. In addition to the chamber, the hotels and restaurants are very active in this space. Bars are very active, and the medical community. That's really the most, those are the loudest voices that I'm hearing. ALEC is mostly involved at the state level. I don't see them at the federal level as much.
Is that true? Is ALEC, what is it? American?
Oh, and also I want to say, and the nursing home industry is all over this. So, this is a tort reform fandango. This is every player on every issue sort of, converged to try to pass legislation while everybody's teleworking. That's what this is. And, we don't know, it's very strange to be working against a bill that you haven't seen yet, but you're just hearing about it. So, we're waiting with bated breath to see what Mitch McConnell and company are going to produce, and then we'll respond accordingly.
But ALEC, so ALEC, for those on the Zoom that don't know, is a Koch-backed nonprofit group that's been sort of espousing corporate immunity for a while, and they have some sort of model legislation, because as Linda says, they've been active at the state level, and some of their model legislation has been enacted in recent weeks. I don't know how involved they are at the federal level, but I would imagine, if you take a look at the Utah statute or some of these other statutes, this is what Mitch McConnell and Cornyn staff are looking at to try to figure out, what they're going to draft. So it's not going to be that different from the ALEC, playbook.
Actually, I can tell you something that's interesting. In the time that this pandemic is going on, the Institute for Legal Reform has spent $6 million to try to get these concepts, get folks attracted to these concepts. So, this is going to be, as soon as the bill is introduced, this is really going to be a very big play that the business community is going to make.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Final question. Do you have any other thoughts about what all of us on this call can do? Senator Hirono said, speak with our senators, particularly Republicans. Anything else that you all can suggest.
Well, I want to go back to the fact that the polling shows that it's not just Democrats that agree that immunity is a bad idea. It's not just Democrats, it's Republicans as well. It's the majority of Republicans as well. So we're in a very strong position with the public. And that's why editorial writers all over the country have backed the position of no immunity in this pandemic. So I think that letters to the editor are really important. I think letters to Congress are really important. We have to make some noise. This is going to be, every business in America is going to try to get a piece of this. And it's a very short time frame, really, because the next COVID package has to include monies for municipality in the states that are desperately needed just to even clean up the streets, or the revenue that states and cities have are so depleted because of the tax base and because so many people are unemployed, that there's going to be this pressure to get something passed. And so we have this time frame, which is probably in July, from now to July. And we just have to make a lot of noise and work really hard. But just know the public is with us, and we have nothing to be embarrassed about. We are right about this. And you asked about can we get Republicans? I don't know, because it's so tribal right now on Capitol Hill, but we're going to try because we know that the public is with us. So we're going to keep trying. And I hope all the people on this call keep trying.
We definitely need to join with workers as they demand healthy and safe working conditions. We need to be pushing for enforceable standards for healthy and safe workplace. That's good for workers, but it's also good for employers and consumers.
I think this stuff always works well when we have great stories. I mean, they're terrible stories, but you know what I mean. When we know what's going on the ground. So I agree with Rebecca. We need to hear from workers. We need to hear from consumers. If people on this call hear stories of things going really awry, those are the sorts of things that can move the needle. And so we need to know as much as we can about what's happening. Who's both the good and the bad, right? The small businesses that are doing a great job with limited resources to keep their workers and consumers safe, and large companies that are doing a terrible job, because we've all lived through how much media did that Smithfield Farms case get? And it got media, and it got a lot of eyeballs because people thought, oh my God, like that's a horrible situation. And then also people thought, I eat that stuff, right? And so there's this sort of, we have to find a way to get those stories in front of all the journalists that are sort of hungry for that news. And I think that'll make it a lot harder to pass this bill because I think constituents will be really, really angry. But we've all said that before. I thought constituents were going to be really, really angry about the tax bill too. So we have to do a lot to make this real for the people who read the paper and watch the news.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, Myriam, Linda, for helping to build such an impactful factual record for moving forward, and really for your leadership on this. We will do all we can, all of us listening to you three, to back you up, to communicate to our members of Congress, to make noise at the state and local level. We just thank you for what you're doing, and your organizations, AAJ and National Employment Law Project. We appreciate your fighting the good fight. So thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing an hour with us on this day. Thank you to my comrades at AFJ for their work in putting this together. Everyone have a good week or so, and we'll be back in touch with everyone about our next Holding the Court, but thank you all.